Thanks indeed, Philip. This is my second time in a week doing a 9 o'clock conference start in Dublin, and I move between admiring people who organise conferences to start at 9 o'clock in Dublin, wondering how well they'll fill the seats, versus the competition with the trains and travel times. But I was delighted to hear this morning that indeed this conference is not just dependent on you, the people in the room, and the people who will come perhaps in the next hour or so, but the many people online. And I think that reflects the level of interest in the subject matter we're talking about. Where do you start with climate and health, and where do you start to bring those questions and variables together in a coherent discussion? Well, hopefully over the course of today, you will get to do some of that. I think the Climate Health Alliance, that partnership specifically with the HSE is I hope, something that broadens the discussion beyond the HSE, because we are truly talking about the relevance of healthcare to the issues of climate rather than necessarily the Health Service Executive. Arguably, the two greatest existential threats are climate and war, and they indeed are not mutually exclusive of each other. But when we think of the world around us today and we think of what's happening, we can look in any of those two headings and see reason to be fearful and reason to be concerned. And then we look and see that we also have reason to be hopeful. But hope itself is not a strategy. And when we clearly have evidence, we have to follow the evidence. Perhaps what's most common between the issues of those two major threats of climate and war, unfortunately, is man's fault line in selfishness and lack of regard for the world around us and the people in it, and lack of regard for the fact that we hold this world perhaps simply as one generation passing through with responsibilities to the next. But I want to talk just for a moment, if I can, specifically about health in the context of climate, and I want to talk specifically about the Health Service Executive. Firstly, in the context of health, it's very rare that we hear in the narrative, even today in modern day discourse around the issues of climate, it's very rare that we hear the significance of impact on the health of the population, on the health of the global population, on the potential for the prevalence of disease to worsen after generations of the prevalence of disease getting better. And so if we're not careful and not cautious and don't take time to reflect, the damage goes beyond far what we often talk about or see. And we do need to talk about it. We do need to have that conversation. We do need to think as global citizens. We do need to think as people who are not just in our own small part. And if things are looking pretty good today, well, sure, why would we be worried about tomorrow? That's not the purpose. In fact, it perhaps is that disposition that has got us somewhat into the bother and trouble that we're in so many ways as a world. And then I want to talk about the health service itself and the health service and the role of the Health Service Executive in this very important subject. And there are a number of roles and there are a number of reasons for us to think carefully. Firstly, we're the largest employer in the state. I have the privilege of leading over 150,000 people. It's the most immense privilege that I could think of having. And when I finish my public sector career, I will look back on that indeed with a huge sense of privilege. But collectively and individually, that 150,000 people can be a major force of change in any agenda that we choose to set, any agenda at all. But there's no doubt it can be a major force of change in the context of the challenges that we face when we talk about climate. How those 150,000 people behave and live in their own families and in their own communities. The ripple effect of 150,000 people in Ireland is quite significant when you look at it as a percentage of the population. And so that's just us as people. And then there's us as the health service provider, the provider of health and personal social services to all of the citizens of the state on behalf of the state. And I constantly remind health professionals, we are servants of the people. We are servants of our fellow citizens. That's why we exist. And two things strike me about that in the context of climate. Firstly, you wouldn't believe the amount of buildings I'm responsible for. I must be one of the biggest property owners in the country, but I stress not like collecting rent every week. But we have an enormous amount of property, very old facilities, very old buildings, hospitals that we have to run and keep running today, community nursing units, health centres, primary care centres, mental health care facilities. We have an enormous property portfolio. And in that alone, again, we're challenged. But at least now we have an action plan in the health service that has the signed up commitment of the board of the HSE and I as its CEO. Will we always get it right? Of course we won't. Will the imperative of the need to do something today get in the way of doing the right thing? They are all struggles and tensions we face every day as we make decisions. But we have an action plan, we have a stated commitment, we have a focus, and I believe you will see later on today and hear from our colleagues in HSE estates about some of that progress. But then let's go beyond the 150,000 people and let's go beyond the buildings. And let's talk specifically about healthcare and how we deliver healthcare and the modalities of care and the methodologies and how we do that. How do we deliver care at the lowest level of complexity possible? How do we promote positive health? How do we reduce the dependence on healthcare? How do we provide care for people living as close as possible to their own home? How do we reduce the dependency on a very traditional acute-centric model of care? And all of those have benefits or indeed disadvantages when we talk about the issue of climate. And so there can't be any more reason or importance for us but to stop and think as healthcare professionals and as healthcare providers about every aspect of what we do in the context of that very real challenge of climate. When I was a young fella starting out in the health service, which isn't today or yesterday, it's 36 years ago now, we used to love learning about the determinants of health, and you had the circles and the charts and the graphs. We perhaps need to revisit some of those graphs and charts and put climate bang slap in the middle in the biggest writing that we can find. Enjoy the day. Thank you.